She had long ago accepted that certain kinds of affection were not meant for women like her, not the kind sung about in drawing rooms, not the kind whispered beneath chandeliers, not the kind sealed with a gentleman's careful kiss. Miss Eleanor Frost belonged to a quieter world, one of early mornings, flower-dusted fingers, and the patient endurance of those whom society overlooked. She rose before dawn each day in the modest lodging-house near Seven Dials, where narrow staircases creaked like old bones and fireplaces smoked more than they warmed. London in 1817 was not kind to those without lineage. It tolerated them, barely. Eleanor lived there with her grandmother, Mrs. Agnes Frost, whose lungs had weakened with the damp winters. Medicine was dear, physicians were dearer still, and reputation was a currency Eleanor could not afford to lose. The Frost family name once carried modest honour. Her father, Captain James Frost, had served the crown, a capable man, a careful driver of horses, a gentleman in conduct, until the accident, a storm, a carriage descending too quickly, a lady of rank thrown from her seat, and whispers that never ceased. The lady had been the wife of a nobleman. She had died. Though no formal conviction followed, society did not require proof to condemn. Captain Frost returned from that night altered, not by injury of the body, but of the mind. Guilt hollowed him, grief consumed him, and eventually silence claimed him entirely. Now he resided in a quiet country estate under discreet medical supervision, funded by debts Eleanor dared not measure aloud. London believed him dead. Eleanor allowed the rumour to persist. It was easier than explaining madness. To support her grandmother and the mounting costs of private care, Eleanor baked small sugared biscuits each morning. She wrapped them in parchment, tied with thin blue ribbon, and carried them in a wicker basket through the more fashionable districts. Mayfair, sometimes Bloomsbury if she felt brave. She did not beg. She sold, and she smiled. Her smile became known in certain circles, not among dukes or marquesses, but among governesses, shopkeepers, carriage drivers, and children whose nurses permitted indulgence. She offered warmth without expectation. It was the only luxury she possessed. What she did not know, could not have known, was that her quiet constancy would one day intersect with a man who despised warmth entirely. His Grace, Nathaniel Alexander Irwin, Duke of Ashbourne, did not enjoy being touched. Not by strangers, not by acquaintances, not even by blood. London called him the Marble Duke. He was not cruel. He was not scandalous. He was not improper. He was distant. His aversion had long been the subject of drawing-room curiosity. Some called it eccentricity. Others suggested nervous disorder. A few whispered of childhood strictness under an overbearing father who believed emotion a weakness. Whatever its origin, the rule remained unbroken. The Duke did not engage in unnecessary contact. Gloves were worn year-round. Handshakes were brief. Dances were avoided unless absolutely unavoidable. He attended the season not for pleasure, but for obligation. And this particular spring, obligation weighed heavily. The Ashbourne lineage required securing. The previous Duke, now confined mostly to his estate and his temper, had made his expectations clear. Nathaniel must marry. He must produce an heir, and he must do so advantageously. Lady Beatrice Kelly had long been considered the suitable candidate. Daughter of a marquess, graceful, accomplished, raised within the same circles, she possessed the refinement expected of a duchess. What she did not possess was patience for Nathaniel's restraint. "You cannot expect a marriage devoid of touch," she had once told him, voice sharpened by pride. "Society will notice." Society always noticed. And society was watching closely on the evening everything changed. The Grosvenor Square ballroom shimmered beneath a canopy of crystal chandeliers. Silks brushed marble floors. Fans fluttered like nervous wings. Footmen moved in choreographed silence. Nathaniel stood near the far archway, gloved hands folded behind his back, expression carved in indifference. Conversations rippled nearby. They say he has never so much as kissed a lady. Impossible. Quite possible. I heard he recoiled at his own cousin's embrace. Laughter followed. Nathaniel did not react. Lady Beatrice approached, her emerald gown chosen, no doubt, for dramatic effect. "Your Grace," she began sweetly, though tension flickered in her gaze. "One cannot win an argument by silence." "What argument is that?" he asked evenly. "That you are incapable of affection." He studied her. "I am incapable of performance," he replied. The words stung. Before she could retort, an elderly dowager, notorious for stirring mischief, interjected loudly enough for half the room to hear. "Perhaps His Grace simply requires the proper incentive." Eyes turned, music softened, expectation thickened the air. The dowager, smiling with predatory delight, gestured toward the ballroom doors, where several servants had paused, trays balanced carefully. Among them stood Eleanor Frost. She had been hired for the evening by a confectioner who supplied delicate pastries for the event. It was temporary work, discreet, necessary. She kept her gaze lowered as instructed, until she felt it, the weight of attention. Nathaniel followed the dowager's gesture. He saw not a social climber, not a titled beauty, not ambition. He saw a young woman holding a tray of sugared biscuits, fingers dusted faintly with flour, posture composed, though plainly startled by the sudden scrutiny. She did not tremble. That, more than anything, unsettled him. The dowager's voice cut through the silence. "Choose her, Your Grace, if you dare." The suggestion was absurd, improper, unthinkable, and yet something within Nathaniel, something long dormant, bristled at the notion that he would retreat. He crossed the ballroom, measured steps, whispers trailing behind him like silk ribbons. Eleanor's breath steadied by force of habit. Noblemen did not approach girls like her, not unless reprimanding them. He stopped before her, close enough to see the faint freckles across her nose, close enough to detect cinnamon in the air. "Your name?" he asked quietly. "Eleanor Frost, Your Grace." Her voice did not waver. He removed his glove. Gasps rose immediately. No one had seen him do so publicly. He reached forward, not abruptly, not violently, but with deliberate intent. And he kissed her, not cruelly, not tenderly, but undeniably. The room erupted. Fans dropped. Glasses clinked. Lady Beatrice stiffened visibly. Eleanor stood frozen, not from revulsion, not from faintness, but from the understanding that in a single scandalous moment her life had shifted beyond recovery. Nathaniel withdrew. He regarded her with a gaze no longer marble, but sharpened by consequence. "You will not suffer for my decision," he said low enough for only her to hear. She swallowed. "My grandmother might disagree, Your Grace." Something almost resembling amusement flickered across his face. Behind them, London roared, and thus began a union neither affection nor propriety had intended, but which fate, in its quiet audacity, had already sealed. Eleanor did not remember leaving the ballroom. Later she would recall fragments, the taste of sugar on her tongue, the way the chandeliers blurred into trembling stars, the sharp intake of breath from 100 mouths that had never known hunger and could not imagine fear as she did. But in the moment, she moved as though the world had become water and she was walking through it heavy and slow, pulled downward by a single truth. A duke's kiss was not affection. It was announcement. And in the regent's world, an announcement was often a sentence. Outside, the night air struck her cheeks like a reprimand. Carriages rolled past, lacquered and shining, while footmen called for their masters, and laughter spilled into the street in bright, careless bursts. Eleanor stepped away from the great house, toward the edge of the square, clutching her cloak tighter as if cloth could shield her from reputation. She had worked in noble houses before, quietly, briefly, invisibly. But now every eye felt sharpened. A maid passing her glanced twice, then whispered to another. Eleanor's throat tightened. Her first instinct was not romance, it was mathematics. How many days of work would she lose? How much would the physician demand by the end of the week? How quickly would her grandmother's worry turn into despair? She forced herself onward, trying to reach the side street where her basket waited, trying to retrieve the small wages she had earned before her life shattered. She had almost reached the iron gate when a shadow stepped into her path. A tall man. A servant? No. The posture was too rigid, too commanding. Then she recognized the silhouette even in darkness. Broad shoulders, unhurried stance, the unmistakable presence of privilege. His Grace had followed her. Eleanor halted so abruptly her shoes scraped stone. "My lord," she managed, and dipped into a curtsy that was more survival than respect. "Do not curtsy," he said. The words were not harsh, but they were final. Eleanor straightened slowly, pulse thundering. Nathaniel stood 2 paces away, precisely 2, as if distance was part of his nature. Even outdoors, away from chandeliers and gossiping dowagers, he wore his composure like armor. "You did not look surprised," he said. Eleanor's brows knit, confusion cutting through her fear. "Surprised, Your Grace?" "When I kissed you." A laugh almost escaped her, not because the question amused her, but because it was so absurd she did not know how to answer it. "I was too shocked to be anything else," she said honestly. "But surprise is not a luxury I have much time for." His gaze sharpened. "You speak boldly." "I speak plainly," Eleanor corrected. "Because I must." Silence hung between them, thick with the weight of what had happened inside. And then the Duke said quietly, "I will be held accountable." Eleanor blinked. He continued before she could speak. "Society will insist I have compromised you. Society will be correct." Her cheeks burned, compromised, a single word capable of collapsing a woman's future. "And what do you intend to do about it?" she asked, her voice careful. Nathaniel's jaw tightened, as if even this conversation irritated his need for control. "I intend to marry you." Eleanor's breath left her lungs. For an instant she thought she had misheard. A duke did not marry a woman who carried trays. A duke did not marry a girl without connections, without property, without a respectable family to present at introductions. He did not. "Your Grace," she whispered. "You cannot possibly mean that." "I do," he said. "And Lady Beatrice." The words escaped before Eleanor could stop them. She had seen the way the lady's face had turned sharp as glass. Nathaniel's expression did not change. "Lady Beatrice is not my wife." "But she expected to be." "And expectation," he said, "is not entitlement." Eleanor's hands curled into fists inside her sleeves. "You kissed me as if it were an argument to win," she said. "Not as if I were a person." Something flickered in his eyes, irritation, perhaps, or the briefest spark of guilt. "You were not trembling," he said again, as though that single quality mattered above all else. "You did not beg. You did not perform. I chose you." Eleanor stared at him, stunned by the cold, careful way he framed the act as choice, as strategy. "You chose me," she repeated slowly, "but I did not choose this." Nathaniel did not deny it. He simply said, "You may choose what comes next." Eleanor swallowed. Choice was a fine word, dressed in silk. In her world, choice had always come with a cost. "I have a grandmother," she said, forcing steadiness. "She is unwell. She requires medicines and a physician who charges more than I earn in a month." Nathaniel's gaze did not soften, but it sharpened with attention. And I have a father," Eleanor continued, voice tightening. "The world believes he is dead. He is not. He is not well. He is housed away from London because if certain people remembered his name, they would ruin what little remains of our safety." Nathaniel's posture shifted, subtly, but she saw it. Interest, calculation. "Captain Frost," he said. Eleanor stiffened. She had never spoken her father's title aloud in Mayfair. "Yes," she admitted. Nathaniel's face remained composed, yet something in his eyes cooled further. "So you are that Frost." Eleanor's skin went cold. There it was, the past, reaching up like a hand. "I do not know what you have heard," she said, voice trembling despite her will, "but my father did not murder anyone." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "I did not say he did." "No," but his tone suggested the world already had. Eleanor's heart hammered. She could not allow herself to dissolve here, on a street corner, beneath the gaze of a duke. She had survived too long to fall apart now. "If you intend to marry me," she said carefully, "it cannot be for pity." "It is not." "Then why?" Nathaniel's eyes met hers. "Because I require a wife," he said with brutal honesty. "And you require protection." Eleanor flinched. Protection. The word carried the scent of cages. "And if I refuse?" she asked. Nathaniel's gaze moved past her shoulder toward the great house where laughter still spilled from lit windows. "If you refuse," he said, "you will return to your lodging with a ruined name. The confectioner will not hire you again. The women who buy your biscuits will avoid you. Your grandmother will hear whispers. The physician will be paid late." Eleanor's throat tightened. "And the man who kissed you," he added, voice low, "will remain untarnished." There was no cruelty in the statement, only truth. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly. She did not cry. She had long trained herself not to cry in front of those who could afford softness. When she opened her eyes again, she asked, "What kind of marriage?" Nathaniel's expression did not shift. "An arrangement." Eleanor let out a slow breath. A marriage of convenience. She had heard of them, like stories whispered by servants while polishing silver. A titled man needing an heir, a woman needing security. Two lives stitched together without warmth. But warmth, she reminded herself, was not what kept people alive. "And how long?" she asked. 6 months, Nathaniel said. Eleanor's brows rose. 6 months is oddly specific for a lifetime vow. "It will not be a lifetime," he replied. "Not in the way you imagine." Her stomach turned. "You mean divorce." His mouth tightened. "In rare circumstances," he said, "it can be arranged quietly, or we may live separately once the scandal fades, if you prefer. But for now, a wife is required." "Publicly." Eleanor struggled to breathe through the tightening in her chest. She imagined her grandmother's face, pale and worried. She imagined the physician's ledger. She imagined her father in his distant room, staring at nothing, trapped in the consequences of that night. She did not imagine love. Love was a luxury. She opened her eyes fully. "If I agree," she said, "I will not be treated like a thing you purchased." Nathaniel's gaze sharpened. "You will be treated as the Duchess of Ashbourne," he said, "in every public sense." "In public?" Eleanor repeated. "In private," he said. "We will keep our boundaries. I do not want your affection. I do not want your interference. And I will not allow my life to be disrupted by sentiment." The words should have frightened her. Instead, they steadied her, because sentiment had never fed her. "And what will you want then?" she asked. Nathaniel's voice dropped, very low. "Obedience where it matters, and discretion always." Eleanor stared at him, then she said, "Put it in writing." His eyes narrowed slightly. "You would negotiate with a duke?" "I would survive," she corrected. For the first time that night, something almost like respect flickered across his face. "Very well," he said. "Come." Eleanor's feet did not move. "Where?" "To my carriage." Eleanor's blood turned to ice. "No." Nathaniel paused. His gaze held hers, unblinking. "I will not touch you," he said. Eleanor's hands trembled anyway. "Men say many things, Your Grace." "I am not men," he replied. She hated that a part of her believed him, hated it, but she also knew what refusing meant. The street, already full of whispers, would swallow her. Her grandmother would pay the price. Her father would remain forgotten. Eleanor lifted her chin. "Then I will come," she said. "But I will sit as far from you as possible." Nathaniel nodded once. "As you wish." They walked toward the waiting carriage, not side by side, but separated by a careful distance that felt like a rule carved into him. Inside, the velvet seats smelled of leather and money. Eleanor sat rigidly, eyes fixed on the window as the carriage rolled through London's sleeping streets. Nathaniel did not speak for several minutes. Then he said, as if reciting terms rather than confessing motive, "There will be an engagement banquet within days." Eleanor turned sharply. "Engagement?" "Yes. I thought this was to avoid scandal," she said. "An engagement banquet will create it." "It will control it," Nathaniel corrected. "My family requires appearances. London requires spectacle. You will provide both." Eleanor's stomach sank. A banquet meant exposure. Exposure meant judgment. And judgment could kill even faster than poverty. Nathaniel looked at her then, truly looked. "You are afraid," he observed. Eleanor stared back. "Yes," she said softly, "because you kissed me once, and the world decided I belong to you." Nathaniel's gaze remained steady. "Then let us ensure," he said, "the world has no choice but to accept it." The carriage rolled onward, and Eleanor, who had spent her life trying to remain unseen, realized she was about to become the most visible woman in London, whether she survived it or not. By morning, London had already decided who she was. Before Eleanor's eyes even opened to the pale grey light filtering through the narrow curtains of her modest room, the whispers had begun their work. News travelled swiftly in the capital, not by formal announcement, but by the swift exchange of glances, by servants' tongues, by the peculiar hunger of society for anything that disturbed its delicate symmetry. The Duke of Ashbourne had kissed a girl who sold biscuits, and not gently. The story changed shape with every retelling. By the time Eleanor stepped into the small kitchen where her grandmother sat wrapped in a wool shawl, the versions circulating in the streets likely bore no resemblance to the truth. Mrs. Agnes Frost looked up from her teacup with knowing eyes. "You have not slept," she observed softly. Eleanor managed a faint smile. "I suppose I shall sleep next winter instead." Her grandmother studied her more closely. "What happened at the Grosvenor house?" Eleanor paused. She'd always protected her grandmother from unnecessary worry, but this time concealment would not serve them. "A duke," she said slowly, "has proposed marriage." Silence. The clock on the wall ticked once, twice. Mrs. Frost blinked, as though waiting for the jest to reveal itself. "My dear," she said gently, "you have always possessed imagination, but this is extravagant even for you. It is not imagination." Eleanor met her grandmother's gaze steadily. "It is necessity." The older woman's teacup trembled slightly in her hand. "Necessity for whom?" "For us." And so Eleanor told her, not with drama, not with girlish wonder, but with practical clarity. The ballroom, the kiss, the proposal framed as obligation, the 6-month arrangement, the protection. She did not embellish. She did not romanticize. She spoke as one would recite a ledger. When she finished, her grandmother remained quiet for several moments. Then she asked the only question that truly mattered. "Will he be kind?" Eleanor swallowed. "I do not believe he intends cruelty," she said carefully, "but I do not believe he intends affection either." Mrs. Frost exhaled slowly. "Kindness without affection can still sustain a life," she murmured. Eleanor wished she could believe that. By noon, a carriage bearing the Ashbourne crest arrived at 7 Dials. It was not subtle. Polished black lacquer, silver insignia, liveried footmen. Children gathered immediately, staring as though royalty itself had descended into their narrow street. Eleanor felt their eyes on her as she stepped outside. Nathaniel had not come himself. Instead, a solicitor accompanied the carriage, a tall man with precise spectacles and an expression sharpened by habit. "Miss Frost," he said with a curt bow, "His Grace awaits your signature." She nodded once. The parchment he carried was thick, expensive, the seal unbroken until he placed it in her hands. Even the paper smelled wealthy. They entered the modest lodging-house sitting-room, where Mrs. Frost insisted on being present, despite her fragile breath. The solicitor laid the document upon the small wooden table. "Articles of agreement," he read aloud, voice formal and unyielding. Eleanor listened as the terms were presented. A formal engagement to be announced within 3 days. A wedding to follow within the fortnight. Residence at Ashbourne House. Financial provision for Mrs. Agnes Frost. A generous monthly allowance. Full funding for Captain James Frost's continued care under discreet supervision. Eleanor's pulse stuttered at that. The Duke had not merely offered protection. He had investigated. Her father's location had been discovered. There would be no hiding now. She forced her expression to remain composed. "And in return?" she asked. The solicitor adjusted his spectacles. "Miss Frost will comport herself as befitting the future Duchess of Ashbourne. I am aware of what that entails," she said quietly. "Additionally," he continued, "Miss Frost agrees to maintain discretion regarding the nature of the arrangement. The marriage will be considered valid and complete in the eyes of the law and society." Eleanor's eyes moved over the script. Then she saw it. A clause, brief but unmistakable, the expectation of an heir. Her throat tightened. 6 months, she said carefully. The Duke specified 6 months. "The initial term of cohabitation," the solicitor clarified, "after which arrangements may be reassessed." Cohabitation. The word felt heavier than the parchment itself. Mrs. Frost's hand reached across the table and covered Eleanor's. "My dear," she whispered. Eleanor did not look at her grandmother. If she did, she might waver. "And if I failed to produce an heir?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tremor beneath it. The solicitor did not hesitate. "The Duke will determine next steps," which meant the Duke would decide her fate. Eleanor inhaled slowly. "And what protection exists for my family should the Duke tire of this arrangement?" she asked. The solicitor's gaze sharpened slightly. "The Duke does not tire easily, Miss Frost." That was not an answer. She met his eyes squarely. "Put it in writing." He hesitated for the first time. "His Grace does not typically negotiate." "I am not typically kissed without permission in a ballroom," she replied calmly. Silence thickened. The solicitor studied her, not as one studies a servant, but as one evaluates an unexpected adversary. Finally, he nodded. "I will amend the document." 2 hours later, the revised agreement lay before her. Mrs. Frost's allowance secured regardless of marital outcome. Captain Frost's care guaranteed indefinitely. No dissolution of marriage without substantial financial settlement. Eleanor read every line twice. Her name looked fragile in ink. Eleanor Margaret Frost, soon to be Ashbourne. The transformation felt less like elevation and more like disappearance. She lifted the quill. For a moment her hand refused to move. She thought of cinnamon and flour, of mornings before dawn, of anonymity. Then she signed. That evening, Ashbourne House glowed like a citadel. When Eleanor was escorted through its towering doors, she felt not awe, but displacement. Marble floors stretched endlessly. Portraits of ancestors lined the walls, each face stern, each gaze heavy with inherited expectation. Nathaniel awaited her in the library. He stood before a window overlooking the courtyard, hands clasped behind his back, gloved once more. He turned as she entered. "You signed. It was not a question. Yes? His gaze lingered briefly on her face, searching perhaps for regret. You negotiated, he added. I ensured survival, she replied. A faint, almost imperceptible inclination of his head followed. Good. She did not expect praise. The library door closed behind her. For the first time, they stood alone within the house that would soon bear her name. Nathaniel crossed to the desk and retrieved a smaller document. This, he said, is not for the solicitor. Eleanor's brows knit. He placed it before her, handwritten, short, personal. I have added my own condition, he said quietly. She read the single line. I will not touch you without your consent. Eleanor's breath caught. He did not look at her while she absorbed the words. Society will assume certain rights, he said. I will not claim them without permission. Something fragile shifted inside her, not affection, not trust, but a loosening of fear. And if I never grant it? She asked. Nathaniel's gaze met hers then, steady, unflinching. Then we will live as we agreed. No anger, no threat, only fact. Eleanor folded the small document carefully and slipped it into her reticule. I did not expect this from you, she admitted. I do not expect gratitude, he replied. I was not offering it. The faintest curve touched his mouth, gone almost before it appeared. 3 days, he said. The engagement will be announced. You will require gowns. Eleanor glanced down at her simple dress. Yes, she said dryly. I suspected as much. You will be instructed in protocol, introductions, hosting, and how to breathe in corsets, she added. Nathaniel's eyes flickered, amusement restrained but present. Lady Ashbourne will oversee the instruction. Eleanor's stomach tightened. His mother, the fortress within the fortress. Does she approve? Eleanor asked quietly. Nathaniel's expression cooled. She does not. Honesty again. She appreciated it more than comfort. And Lady Beatrice, she ventured. Nathaniel's jaw set slightly. She will adapt. Eleanor doubted that very much. Silence settled between them. Not hostile, not comfortable, simply present. You understand, Nathaniel said at last, voice measured, that once this is announced, retreat will not be possible. Eleanor held his gaze. Retreat ceased the moment you removed your glove, she said. For the first time since the ballroom, something altered in his expression, not warmth, not yet, but awareness. He had expected compliance. He had found resolve. Outside, carriage wheels echoed against stone. London moved on, unaware that within these walls, a girl who had sold biscuits that morning now stood on the precipice of duchesshood, not by fairy tale, not by romance, but by ink. And ink, Eleanor understood better than most, could either preserve a life or rewrite it entirely. By the third morning, Eleanor's name no longer belonged to her. It belonged to the city. London did not whisper now. It declared. The morning gazettes carried polite, carefully phrased announcements. His Grace, the Duke of Ashbourne, is pleased to declare his intention to wed Miss Eleanor Frost. No mention of her station, no mention of the ballroom, no mention of flour-dusted fingers or sugared biscuits, but omission could be louder than confession. Carriages began arriving at Ashbourne House before noon, calling cards, inquiries, thinly veiled curiosity disguised as congratulations. Eleanor watched it all from the tall windows of the drawing-room where she now sat for instruction. Lady Ashbourne had insisted, if Eleanor were to step into society, she must be polished until no trace of her former life remained visible. Nathaniel's mother entered the room without announcement, tall, composed, draped in silver silk that seemed to command obedience by its mere presence. Her gaze travelled slowly over Eleanor, measuring, assessing. You stand too stiffly, she said at once. I was told posture was important, Eleanor replied. "Posture is effortless when one is born to it." A small silence followed. Eleanor inclined her head. "Then I shall practice until it appears so." Lady Ashbourne's lips tightened, not quite approval, not quite disdain. "You may call me your grace in public," she continued. "Privately you may address me as madam." Eleanor nodded. "And what may I call you?" Lady Ashbourne asked coolly. "Eleanor," she answered. The older woman's brows lifted faintly. "Not Duchess?" "Not yet," Eleanor said evenly. A flicker of something, perhaps reluctant respect, passed between them. Instruction began at once: how to enter a room, how to receive a bow, how to incline her head without lowering her worth, which fork preceded which names required the deepest curtsy. It was less education and more choreography. Every movement calculated, every glance weighted. By afternoon, Eleanor's back ached from restraint, but she did not falter. Lady Ashbourne watched her as one observes a racehorse, uncertain whether the creature would run or break. "Your speech," the Duchess mother said at last, circling her. "It carries traces of the lower districts." Eleanor met her gaze calmly. "I have lived there. That will not be mentioned again." Eleanor's pulse quickened. "And my father?" she asked quietly. Lady Ashbourne paused. "That matter," she said carefully, "is already known to certain circles." Eleanor's stomach tightened. "Known how?" "As a scandal best forgotten." The words cut cleanly. Eleanor forced herself not to react. "My father was not a murderer," she said softly. Lady Ashbourne's expression did not change. "In society," she replied, "perception eclipses truth." Eleanor understood that better than anyone. That evening, Nathaniel joined them in the formal dining room. The long mahogany table seemed to stretch endlessly, as though designed to remind its occupants of distance. He sat at one end, Eleanor at the other, Lady Ashbourne between them. Conversation remained courteous but sharp-edged. "The engagement banquet will take place at the end of the week," Lady Ashbourne announced. "So soon?" Eleanor asked before she could stop herself. Nathaniel's gaze lifted. "Delay invites speculation." "And haste invites scrutiny," she countered. A faint crease formed between his brows, not irritation but recognition. "You will withstand scrutiny," he said. "You assume I desire to." Nathaniel set down his glass. "I assume you understand necessity." Eleanor held his gaze. "I do," she replied quietly. Dinner concluded without further conflict, but the air felt thinner than before. As Eleanor rose to retire, she sensed Nathaniel's eyes following her. Not possessive, not tender, but observant, as though he were studying the consequences of his own decision. The engagement banquet arrived like a storm announced days in advance. Ashbourne House glittered with candlelight. Musicians tuned instruments in the gallery. Footmen stood at rigid attention. Eleanor stood before a tall mirror in her assigned chamber, scarcely recognizing the woman reflected there. The gown was ivory silk, high-waisted, embroidered delicately with silver thread. Her hair, once simply pinned for practicality, now cascaded in careful arrangement. She looked every inch the future Duchess, and yet her hands trembled. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Nathaniel entered without waiting for invitation, stopping immediately inside the doorway, maintaining the now familiar distance. He wore black evening attire that sharpened the severity of his features. "You are prepared," he said. "I am adorned," she corrected. He regarded her more closely. The candlelight softened the edges of his usually controlled expression. "You are anxious," he observed. "Only mildly," she said dryly. Silence lingered. Then, unexpectedly, he removed one glove. Slowly, deliberately. Eleanor's breath caught despite herself. He did not approach. He simply held the glove loosely in his hand. "I will not touch you," he said quietly, "but tonight we must appear united." She studied him. "And what does unity look like?" "Proximity," he replied. "Eye contact. Calm. And if I falter, you will not." His certainty unsettled her more than doubt would have. They descended the grand staircase together, not touching, but close enough that their shoulders nearly brushed. The murmur of guests rose like a tide as they entered the ballroom. Heads turned, fans paused mid-air. Conversations stilled. Lady Beatrice stood near the centre of the room, emerald silk gleaming beneath chandeliers. Her eyes locked onto Eleanor at once, cold, measured, unforgiving. Nathaniel inclined his head in acknowledgement. Beatrice curtsied, shallowly. "Miss Frost," she said, voice smooth as polished glass. "Lady Beatrice," Eleanor replied. "I had not realized biscuit-making was such an effective path to nobility." The remark hovered, sharp and deliberate. A ripple of quiet amusement moved through nearby guests. Eleanor's spine straightened. "I find," she said gently, "that persistence is often more effective than birth." A beat of silence, then a faint intake of breath from someone nearby. Nathaniel did not intervene. He watched. Beatrice's smile thinned. "I do hope," she said sweetly, "that you are prepared for the expectations placed upon you." Eleanor met her gaze steadily. "I have lived with expectation all my life." Beatrice's eyes flickered, just briefly. Before she could respond, Lady Ashbourne approached, her presence silencing the exchange. "The orchestra awaits," she said coolly. Nathaniel extended his bare hand, not to take Eleanor's, but to gesture toward the floor. She hesitated only a fraction before stepping forward. The first notes of a waltz began. Gasps murmured again as the Duke, known for his aversion to touch, placed his gloved hand at Eleanor's waist. His other hand hovered near hers, not gripping, but guiding. Eleanor's pulse thundered. His touch was firm, controlled, careful. He did not press closer than necessary, yet the warmth of him, the steady rhythm of his breath, unsettled something deep within her. "You are steady," he murmured, barely audible over the music. "You are not recoiling," she replied softly. "I said I would not." She searched his face. "Why me?" she whispered. His jaw tightened slightly. "You did not look at me with ambition." The answer surprised her. "I looked at you with confusion," she said. A faint shadow of something almost like humor crossed his expression. "Exactly." They turned gracefully beneath the chandeliers. Around them society watched, judged, calculated. But for a brief moment, within the measured steps of the dance, something shifted. Nathaniel's hand at her waist did not tremble. He did not flinch. And Eleanor realized with quiet astonishment that she was the only woman in the room he had ever held this way. Across the ballroom, Lady Beatrice's eyes darkened, and from the shadowed archway beyond the musicians, another gaze lingered. Cold, intent, unforgiving. Lord Sebastian Irwin had arrived, and the storm that began with a kiss was only just beginning to gather. Not all storms announce themselves with thunder. Some enter quietly, with polished boots and a courteous bow. Lord Sebastian Irwin did not resemble his brother. Where Nathaniel carried restraint like armor, Sebastian wore charm like a blade. He was handsome in a way that invited conversation, warm in tone, measured in speech. But there was something beneath it, something sharp, something waiting. Eleanor noticed him before he addressed her. He stood near the French doors of the ballroom, watching the dancers with unsettling stillness. His gaze lingered on her longer than courtesy allowed. When the waltz concluded and applause rippled politely through the hall, Nathaniel escorted her toward the refreshment table. Sebastian stepped forward. "Brother," he said lightly. Nathaniel's posture shifted, not dramatically but perceptibly. "Sebastian." They did not embrace. They did not shake hands. They simply regarded one another. "Miss Frost," Sebastian said, bowing with effortless grace. "What an extraordinary entrance you have made into our family." Eleanor curtsied. I assure you, it was unplanned." "Oh, I believe that," he replied softly. His eyes studied her face with a familiarity she did not understand. "You resemble him," he added. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "That is enough." Sebastian smiled faintly. "Enough of what?" "Of dredging what is buried." The tension between them felt older than the ballroom. Eleanor sensed it immediately. The shared history, the fractures not spoken aloud. "I have not been properly introduced," Sebastian continued smoothly. "I am Lord Sebastian Irwin, the less celebrated branch of the family." His tone was almost playful. Almost. "Miss Frost," he said, lowering his voice just enough, "may I ask, do you believe accidents are ever truly accidents?" The question struck her like a stone dropped in still water. Nathaniel stepped closer. "That subject is not to be discussed." Sebastian's gaze did not leave Eleanor's. "Of course," he murmured. "Not tonight." He inclined his head and withdrew, disappearing into the swirl of silk and candlelight, as though he had never been there. Eleanor exhaled slowly. "You need not engage him," Nathaniel said. "Engage him how?" "By answering." She looked at him carefully. "You assume I intend to." He studied her face. "He enjoys unsettling." "So do you," she replied quietly. The faintest shadow of acknowledgement crossed his expression, but before either could speak further, Lady Ashbourne approached once more. "Guests are beginning to inquire," she said coolly. "You must circulate." Circulate, smile, appear unshaken. Eleanor straightened her shoulders. "I will manage," she said. Nathaniel watched her move into conversation with a group of matrons. He expected hesitation. He expected visible discomfort. Instead, he witnessed composure. She listened more than she spoke, answered without boasting, accepted subtle barbs without visible injury. When one woman remarked, "You must find our customs overwhelming," Eleanor simply replied, "Only as overwhelming as any new responsibility." Grace without surrender. It unsettled him more than rebellion would have. Later that evening, after the final carriage had departed and the last candle extinguished, Eleanor retreated to the small private library she had been permitted to use. The house was quiet. Too quiet. She sat by the fire and removed her gloves slowly, staring at her bare hands. The dance replayed in her mind, his hand at her waist, steady, controlled, not recoiling. A knock sounded softly at the door. She looked up. Sebastian stood there. She did not rise. "I was under the impression the banquet had ended," she said evenly. "It has," he replied, stepping inside without invitation. She stood now. "Then you should not be here." "On the contrary," he said lightly. "This is precisely when truth prefers to visit." She moved toward the door. "You should leave. Do you know how my mother died?" The question froze her. "My father told me she ran a red signal during a storm," she said quietly. Sebastian's expression hardened. "Your father told you that?" "He never told me anything," she corrected. "Others did." Sebastian's voice dropped. "My mother was in that carriage." Her breath caught. "I know," she whispered. "Do you?" His gaze sharpened. "Do you know what it is to watch your life reduced to whispers and closed doors, to have your grief dismissed because the other family held more influence?" Eleanor's pulse thundered. "I lost everything too." "Did you?" His tone turned cutting. "You lost reputation. I lost a mother." The words struck with precision. She did not flinch. "My father lost his mind." A pause, longer than either expected. Sebastian studied her as though recalculating. "You believe him innocent." "I believe," she said carefully, "that storms do not choose sides." His eyes darkened. "You are braver than you appear, Miss Frost. I am only tired of being accused." For a moment, something flickered in his expression. Not sympathy, but recognition. Then it vanished. "Be cautious," he said softly. "You are standing in a family that devours weakness." "And you?" she asked quietly. He smiled faintly. "I devour patience." With that, he turned and left. The door closed behind him. Eleanor's legs weakened. Only once she was alone. She lowered herself into the chair slowly. The accident, the storm, the red signal, her father's haunted silence, Sebastian's accusation, and Nathaniel, standing between them like a wall carved of ice. The next morning, Eleanor received a letter. No seal, no signature. Only a single sentence written in a firm, deliberate hand. "You are not the only daughter in this story." Her heart stuttered. Before she could fully consider its meaning, a footman announced that the Duke requested her presence in his private study. She folded the letter carefully and slipped it into her sleeve. Nathaniel stood by the window when she entered. "You spoke with Sebastian last night," he said. It was not a question. "Yes." "And?" "He grieves." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "He resents. Grief and resentment often share a room," she replied softly. He turned toward her fully now. "Do not attempt to mend what is not yours to mend. And do not attempt to silence what is not yours to bury," she answered before she could stop herself. Silence. Thick. Electric. For a brief second, something fierce sparked between them. "You are bold," he said quietly. "You are guarded. Because I have reason. So do I." The tension did not dissolve. It settled, like something waiting. Nathaniel stepped closer than usual, not touching, but near enough that she felt the warmth of him. "You will not confront him alone again," he said. "I did not seek him." "That is precisely what concerns me." Their eyes held. There was no marble now, no flower-dusted market girl, only two people standing on fault lines neither fully understood. Outside the window, London moved as it always did, unaware that beneath the surface of chandeliers and polite bows, an older storm had begun to stir. And this time it was not a ballroom that would hold it, it was blood and memory, and a carriage that had never truly stopped rolling. Some memories do not fade. They circle, they return, and when they do, they demand reckoning. The morning after the banquet felt unnaturally calm. Ashbourne House resumed its routine, servants gliding through corridors, silver polished to blinding shine, correspondence sorted by priority and importance. But beneath the stillness, something had shifted. Nathaniel sensed it before he could name it. Sebastian had not departed London. That alone was deliberate. Eleanor spent the morning with Lady Ashbourne reviewing guest lists for the forthcoming wedding announcement. Her composure remained intact, her movements steady, yet beneath the calm, her thoughts raced. "You are not the only daughter in this story." The unsigned note burned in her mind. She excused herself near midday and requested the carriage to visit her grandmother. Nathaniel was informed at once. He entered the foyer just as she descended the stairs. "You are going out?" he asked. "Yes." "With whom?" "With my driver." His gaze sharpened. "Sebastian remains in town." "Am I to remain indoors indefinitely?" she asked gently. "No," he replied, "but you are to inform me." A beat passed. "I am informing you." The faintest flicker of restrained frustration crossed his face. "I will accompany you." "That is unnecessary." "It is not." She studied him. "You do not trust your brother. I trust him precisely as much as he trusts me. And how much is that? None." The honesty startled her. She nodded once. "Very well." The carriage rolled through London's cobbled streets beneath a sky-threatening rain. Nathaniel sat opposite her, posture rigid, gloves perfectly fitted. They did not speak for several minutes. The rhythm of hooves against stone filled the silence. "Did he tell you details?" Nathaniel asked finally. "Of the accident?" "Yes. He told me he watched his mother buried while my father walked free." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. My father ensured there was no trial. Why? Because scandal destroys more efficiently than justice. Eleanor's gaze lowered. Then my father was sacrificed to silence. He was spared prison. He was condemned to memory. Nathaniel had no immediate answer. The carriage turned sharply, then abruptly slowed. Nathaniel's head lifted. "That was not the expected route," he said. Eleanor's pulse quickened. The driver's voice called through the panel, slightly strained. "Apologies, Your Grace. The main thoroughfare is blocked. We are taking the river road." Nathaniel's expression darkened. "That road is rarely used." "It is faster," Eleanor said quietly. "Faster does not mean safer." The carriage jolted, then accelerated. Too quickly. Nathaniel rose at once, gripping the side rail. "Stop the carriage," he ordered sharply. No response. The horses surged forward. Eleanor's heart slammed against her ribs. "Something is wrong," she whispered. Nathaniel moved toward the front panel, striking it hard. "Stop at once." Still nothing. The sound of wheels rattling violently over uneven stones filled the enclosed space. Eleanor's breathing grew shallow. "Nathaniel!" He turned toward her. His expression had shifted entirely. Not marble, not composed, alert, focused. "Listen to me," he said firmly. "Do not panic." The carriage swerved. Outside, the river cliffs loomed ahead. Eleanor's mind flashed. Another carriage, another storm, another loss. "I cannot go through this again," she whispered. "You will not." He moved to her side, not hesitating, not measuring distance. He took her hand, firmly. For the first time, without ceremony, without performance, without witnesses. Her fingers trembled against his. "Look at me," he commanded softly. She did. "Breathe." The carriage lurched violently. Nathaniel braced himself and reached for the interior emergency brake lever. It resisted. "Sabotaged," he muttered. Eleanor's stomach dropped. Sebastian. The wheels struck a deep rut. The carriage tilted dangerously. Nathaniel lunged toward the door. "If we cannot stop it, we jump when I say." Her eyes widened. "The horses, I will not let you be dragged." He forced the door open against the rush of wind. The cliff edge was approaching too quickly. "On my count," he said. Her hand clutched his sleeve. "Nathaniel!" He did not release her. "1, 2... The carriage struck a stone, jerking violently sideways. "Now!" They leapt. The ground tore into her shoulder as they rolled down a grassy embankment. Behind them, the carriage thundered forward, smashed against the guardrail, and tipped over the cliff's edge. The sound echoed through the valley. Then silence. Eleanor lay stunned, breath ragged. Nathaniel was already moving. "Are you injured?" he demanded, brushing dirt from her sleeve. I don't think so." He cupped her face instinctively, checking for bleeding. His bare hands, no gloves, no hesitation. His fingers lingered longer than necessary, his breath uneven. "You could have died," he said, voice low and raw. "So could you." He exhaled sharply. "I misjudged him." "Sebastian?" "Yes." Eleanor pushed herself upright slowly. "Why now?" Nathaniel's expression darkened. "Because he believes revenge requires escalation." She looked toward the cliff edge, the shattered carriage below. "This was meant for me," she said quietly. "No." He met her eyes. "It was meant for us." The distinction settled heavily between them. Footsteps approached from the road above, Ashbourne riders who had followed at a distance. Nathaniel signaled sharply. "Secure the perimeter. Find the driver." The men moved quickly. Eleanor turned back to him. "You held my hand," she said softly. He looked at her as though only just realizing it. His fingers still curled around hers. He released her slowly. "I did. And you did not recoil." A silence passed. "No," he admitted. Rain began to fall lightly, cold against her skin. He removed his coat without hesitation and draped it around her shoulders. "From this moment forward," he said quietly, "you do not leave my sight without protection. I am not fragile." I know. His voice softened. That is precisely why you are dangerous. To whom, she did not ask. They stood together on the rain-slicked road, watching the wreckage below. Nathaniel's composure had not returned fully. And Eleanor understood something then. The marble duke did not fear touch. He feared loss. And somewhere between the ballroom and the cliff's edge, she had become something he was unwilling to lose. Far below, the broken carriage lay twisted among rocks. The past had attempted to repeat itself. This time, it had failed. But the storm was not finished. It had merely changed its target. Rain lingered over London long after the carriage was retrieved from the ravine. Not a violent storm, only a cold, steady drizzle that seemed to seep into stone and bone alike. Ashbourne House was no longer calm. Servants moved with hushed urgency. Messengers were dispatched. The driver, found unconscious but alive, had been taken under guard. His story was confused, fragmented, but one fact remained clear. The reins had been tampered with before departure. Nathaniel stood in his study, hands resting on the polished mahogany desk, listening as Henry delivered the report. "The brake line was cut, Your Grace," Henry said evenly. Cleanly. Deliberately. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "And Sebastian, he was seen leaving his town residence shortly before your carriage departed. Destination? Unknown." Nathaniel dismissed him with a curt nod. When the door closed, the room fell silent. He did not rage, he did not shout, but something within him hardened irrevocably. Eleanor, meanwhile, sat in her chamber staring at the faint bruise forming along her shoulder. She had not wept. She had not trembled. But her thoughts would not quiet. The cliff, the wind, Nathaniel's hand gripping hers without hesitation, his voice steady despite the chaos. "You could have died. It was meant for us." She had lived 15 years with whispers about a carriage accident. Today, she had nearly become one. A knock sounded gently at her door. "Enter," she said. Nathaniel stepped inside. He did not remain by the threshold this time. He crossed the room, close enough that the space between them felt charged. "You are certain you are unhurt?" he asked. "Yes." He studied her carefully. His gaze lingered on the faint discoloration at her shoulder. He reached out instinctively, then paused. For a moment, she wondered if he would withdraw. He did not. His fingers brushed the edge of the bruise gently, almost reverently. "You should rest," he said quietly. "I am not fragile," she repeated. "I know." He did not remove his hand immediately. The warmth of his touch did not carry calculation. It carried fear. "Sebastian will not stop," she said softly. "No. And what will you do?" Nathaniel's expression shifted. "I will end this." She searched his face. "How?" "By removing his leverage." "You mean me?" The words hung between them. "You are not leverage," he replied sharply, "but I am the target." He did not deny it. "I should leave," she said suddenly. His head snapped up. "Leave? For your sake?" His eyes darkened. "You believe I cannot withstand my own family. I believe," she said carefully, "that you have endured enough fractures." A flicker of something fierce crossed his face. "You are not a fracture. Then what am I?" The question was quiet, dangerous. He stepped closer, so close now that the space between them vanished entirely. "You are my wife," he said. "On paper. Do not diminish it." She held his gaze. "You once told me unity is proximity and calm." "Yes." "And what is this?" He did not answer immediately. His hand rose slowly, cupping her jaw, not commanding, not forcing. Steady. Intent. "This," he said quietly, "is refusal." "Refusal of what?" "To lose you." The words landed softly, but they changed everything. Eleanor's breath caught. "You barely know me," she whispered. "I know enough." Silence stretched. Then she did something neither of them anticipated. She placed her hand over his, not to remove it. but to hold it there. You are not marble, she said. His eyes flickered. And you are not ordinary. Their foreheads nearly touched. For the first time since that reckless kiss in Grosvenor Square, the tension between them was not born of scandal, it was born of truth. He leaned in. Not abruptly, not to claim, but to ask. She did not retreat. Their lips met, softly, not a performance, not a challenge, but a decision. Outside the chamber, the rain continued its steady descent. Inside, something warmer had begun to take shape, but peace was brief. The following afternoon, a visitor was announced. Lady Beatrice Kelly. She entered Ashbourne House not as a guest, but as someone who believed she still possessed claim. Her emerald gown was replaced with mourning grey, an unsettling choice. "I have come to speak with the Duke," she said coolly. Eleanor received her in the drawing-room. "He is occupied." Beatrice's eyes flicked toward her. "You are uninjured, I see. Disappointed?" A faint smile curved Beatrice's lips. "Only curious." They regarded one another in silence. Then Beatrice stepped closer. "You truly believe he chose you out of affection?" Eleanor did not answer. "You are a shield," Beatrice continued, "a convenient rebellion." "And you?" Eleanor asked evenly. "Were you love or ambition?" The question struck its mark. Beatrice's composure wavered, only slightly. "He and I were raised together," she said. "There are promises between children that linger. There are also decisions between adults that matter more." Beatrice's eyes hardened. "You will not withstand what is coming." "And what is that? Sebastian has allies." Eleanor's pulse tightened. "And you?" Beatrice did not respond directly. Instead, she leaned closer. "If you care for him at all," she murmured, "you will remove yourself." She withdrew before Eleanor could reply. Nathaniel entered moments later, having overheard only the last exchange. "What did she want?" he asked. "Warning," Eleanor replied. He studied her. "Do you believe her?" "Yes." "And?" "And I am still here." His expression softened, just barely. "You are stubborn." "So are you." "Good." That evening, news arrived. Sebastian had convened a private meeting with several influential investors tied to the Ashbourne estates. Rumours spread rapidly. Inheritance discussions resurfaced. Questions about legitimacy, about heirs, about strength. Nathaniel stood in the great hall, watching the servants light the candelabras. "They believe I will yield," he said quietly. "To keep peace," Eleanor guessed. "Yes." "And will you?" He turned toward her. "Peace that costs you is not peace." She held his gaze. "Then what is the price?" His answer came without hesitation. "Everything." The rain finally ceased, but the air remained heavy. Eleanor understood now. This was no longer about a carriage. It was about control. Sebastian sought to wound, to fracture, to force Nathaniel into choosing blood over bond. But for the first time in years, Nathaniel Irwin did not stand alone. He had chosen defiance. And Eleanor, once a girl selling sugared biscuits in the market, had become the line he refused to cross. The battle ahead would not be fought with sabres. It would be fought with reputation, with inheritance, with truth buried 15 years too long. And the next move would determine not only who inherited Ashbourne, but who survived it. There are truths that sleep quietly for years, not because they are forgotten, but because they are inconvenient. The morning after Sebastian's meeting with the Ashbourne investors, the household awoke under a different kind of tension, quieter than fear, sharper than anger. Nathaniel had not slept. Eleanor knew it before she saw him. He stood in the study, coat discarded over the back of a chair, papers spread across the desk in disordered stacks, an unusual sight for a man who prized control above all things. "You have been investigating," she said gently from the doorway. He did not look surprised. Yes. The accident. Yes. She stepped inside and closed the door. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he handed her a single document, a copy of the original carriage report from 15 years prior. She read carefully. The rainstorm, the damaged axle, the broken lantern. But something else caught her attention. A witness statement, brief, almost overlooked. A stable hand reported that the signal lantern had already failed prior to departure. Eleanor's pulse quickened. Failed prior to departure, she repeated softly. Yes. And yet the blame fell entirely upon my father. Nathaniel's voice remained level. My father ensured the investigation concluded quickly. Why? To protect the Ashbourne name. Eleanor swallowed. So my father became the sacrifice. Nathaniel's gaze did not waver. Yes. The honesty cut cleanly. She lowered the document slowly. And Sebastian knows this? He suspects, Nathaniel said. But suspicion is not proof. Silence settled between them. He believes vengeance is justice, Eleanor murmured. He believes suffering is inheritance. Eleanor moved closer to the desk. What if the lantern did not fail naturally? She asked quietly. Nathaniel's eyes sharpened. You think it was tampered with? I think storms make convenient disguises. The implication hung heavily in the air. If the lantern had been deliberately damaged, if the carriage had been doomed before departure, then the accident was not misfortune. It was design, and Captain Frost had taken the blame for a crime he did not commit. Nathaniel exhaled slowly. I have requested access to the original Ashbourne estate records, he said. Sebastian has attempted to block it. Why? Because those records include financial transfers made immediately after the accident. Eleanor's breath caught. Payments. Yes. To whom? That is what he does not want revealed. By late afternoon, tension had ripened into confrontation. Sebastian arrived at Ashbourne House unannounced. He did not smile. He did not bow. Nathaniel met him in the great hall. Eleanor stood nearby, not hidden, not withdrawn. Searching old records? Sebastian asked coolly. Nathaniel's expression remained steady. Yes, you always preferred ledgers to people, and you always preferred chaos to truth. Sebastian's gaze shifted toward Eleanor. She should not be involved in this. She already is, Nathaniel replied. Sebastian's voice hardened. Your father destroyed mine. No, Nathaniel said evenly. My father protected himself. A flicker of surprise crossed Sebastian's face. You admit it. I admit nothing without evidence. Evidence? Sebastian laughed once, hollow and sharp. You bury evidence. Eleanor stepped forward. My father did not kill your mother. Sebastian's eyes snapped toward her. You were not there. Neither were you. The words hung dangerously between them. For a moment it seemed as though Sebastian might lash out. Instead, he drew in a measured breath. You are bold, he said softly. I am tired, she replied. His gaze softened only slightly. You think this will end cleanly. I think truth rarely ends cleanly, she said. Sebastian turned back to Nathaniel. You are choosing her over blood. Nathaniel did not hesitate. I am choosing what is right. A silence followed, then Sebastian's voice lowered. If you expose our father's dealings, you expose the entire house. Nathaniel's expression did not change. Then let it be exposed. For the first time, uncertainty flickered in Sebastian's eyes. You would dismantle your inheritance? If inheritance is built upon corruption, it deserves dismantling. The words echoed against marble. Eleanor felt something shift irreversibly. Sebastian studied his brother long and hard. You have changed, he said quietly. No, Nathaniel replied. I have stopped pretending. Sebastian's gaze returned to Eleanor one last time. If he loses everything, he murmured. You lose it too. She met his eyes calmly. I had nothing to begin with. That answer unsettled him more than defiance would have. Without another word, he turned and left. That evening, the estate archivist delivered the requested documents. Nathaniel and Eleanor worked side by side in the study, candles burning low, transfers, signatures, an unusually large payment to a carriage supplier 2 days before the accident, a supplier known to have ties to Sebastian. Eleanor's hands trembled. "He knew," she whispered. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "It appears so." "But why?" she asked. "To redirect blame." Eleanor's heart pounded. Then his mother was never meant to be in that carriage. Nathaniel's gaze darkened. "No." Silence thickened. "If she was not meant to be in it," Eleanor's voice faltered, "then someone else was." The weight of realization descended slowly. The accident had not been random. It had been arranged. Not by Sebastian as a grieving son, but by someone seeking financial advantage, and Sebastian, young and furious, had believed the story he was told. Nathaniel leaned back in his chair. "My father paid the supplier." Eleanor closed her eyes briefly. "To protect himself," she said. "Yes. And your brother has spent 15 years avenging the wrong man." Nathaniel exhaled slowly. "Yes." The truth did not bring triumph. It brought devastation. Eleanor reached for his hand instinctively. This time, he did not hesitate. He clasped hers tightly. "What will you do?" she asked. Nathaniel's voice was steady, but no longer cold. "I will tell him. And if he refuses to believe you, then I will still tell him." The candle flames flickered. Outside, London hummed unaware. 15 years of hatred had been built on a lie, and lies, once exposed, do not disappear quietly. They collapse, and when they collapse, they take more than one man down with them. Nathaniel rose. "I will not allow this house to be built on ghosts," he said. Eleanor stood with him. "And I will not allow my father to carry a crime that was never his." For the first time since the ballroom, their alliance felt less like survival and more like choice. The storm that had begun on a cliff now revealed its true origin. Not vengeance, not rivalry, but corruption hidden beneath aristocratic pride. And by morning, Ashbourne House would no longer belong to silence. There are moments in a life when inheritance feels less like privilege and more like accusation. Nathaniel had carried the Ashbourne name like a shield for most of his adult years. Rigid, polished, impenetrable. Now, standing in the dim corridor outside Sebastian's private residence, he understood it had also been a chain. Eleanor stood beside him. Not behind, not hidden, beside. "You do not have to enter with me," he said quietly. "I do," she replied. He studied her face for a moment, searching for fear, hesitation, regret. He found none. He knocked. Sebastian opened the door himself. His expression shifted immediately when he saw them together. "I did not invite you," he said coolly. "No," Nathaniel replied evenly, "but this concerns you more than anyone." Sebastian stepped aside reluctantly. The sitting room was modest compared to Ashbourne House, yet tastefully appointed. Firelight flickered across shelves lined with law books and estate ledgers. Nathaniel did not waste time. He placed the documents on the table between them. "Before you speak," Sebastian said sharply, "I will not tolerate accusations." "Then read," Nathaniel replied. Silence filled the room as Sebastian scanned the first page. His composure did not falter at once. But as his eyes moved further down, to the payment records, the signatures, the dates, something in his posture shifted. "That is forged," he said. "It is notarized," Nathaniel answered. Sebastian read again, slower. The fire cracked softly. Eleanor watched his face, watched disbelief turn into calculation, calculation into dawning horror. "No," he whispered finally. "Yes." Sebastian looked up. "My mother was not the intended passenger," Nathaniel said quietly. The words did not carry cruelty. They carried gravity. Sebastian's hands trembled slightly against the parchment. "You expect me to believe," he said hoarsely, "that my hatred has been misplaced for 15 years. "I expect you to examine evidence," Nathaniel replied. Eleanor stepped forward gently. "My father was never tried," she said. "He was never allowed to defend himself. He carried guilt for something he did not do, because it suited someone else's silence." Sebastian's gaze snapped to her. "And you think that absolves him?" "It reveals him." Sebastian's breathing grew uneven. "You knew," he accused Nathaniel. "No," Nathaniel said firmly. "I suspected nothing until recently. And now I choose truth." The room felt smaller, heavier. Sebastian sank into the nearest chair slowly, as though the strength had left his legs. "My mother trusted this family," he murmured. "She believed we were safe." "So did my father," Eleanor said softly. The words lingered between them, not as accusation, as shared grief. Sebastian pressed his fingers to his temples. "You are asking me to believe that the man I defended my entire life destroyed my mother." Nathaniel's voice lowered. "I am asking you to believe that he destroyed more than one life." Silence. Long. Painful. Then Sebastian looked up. "If this becomes public," he said, "the Ashbourne estate will fracture. Investors will withdraw. The title will be weakened." "Yes," Nathaniel replied. "And you would allow that?" Nathaniel did not hesitate. "Yes." Sebastian stared at him. "You would dismantle everything he built." "I would dismantle everything he falsified." The finality in his voice left no room for negotiation. Sebastian looked at Eleanor. "You changed him." "No," she said quietly. "He chose." Sebastian studied them both. For the first time, the fury that had animated him for years seemed to flicker uncertainly. "My mother deserved justice," he said, voice rough. "She does," Eleanor replied. "And so does my father." The three of them sat in the weight of it. Then Sebastian stood abruptly. "What will you do?" he asked Nathaniel. Nathaniel's answer came without hesitation. "I will present the documents to the estate council." Sebastian's eyes widened. "You would expose our father?" "Yes." "And if he contests it?" "Then the courts will decide." The fire cracked sharply in the silence that followed. Sebastian's shoulders sagged slightly. "You realize," he said slowly, "that this could cost you the title." Nathaniel met his brother's gaze. "If the title is built on deceit, it is not worth keeping." The words settled like a verdict. Sebastian studied him for a long moment. Then quietly, "I spent years believing you were cold." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "I was." "No," Sebastian said slowly. "You were obedient." The distinction hung heavily in the air. Eleanor felt it too. Nathaniel had not been marble. He had been conditioned. Sebastian looked at the documents again. "If we do this," he said carefully, "there is no returning to how it was." "There is no returning regardless," Nathaniel replied. Another long silence. Then Sebastian gave a small, humorless laugh. "Very well," he said quietly. "Let the house fall." Nathaniel blinked once, the smallest flicker of relief crossing his features. "You will stand with me?" he asked. Sebastian's gaze hardened again, but not in hostility. "I will stand for truth," he said. "Do not mistake it for forgiveness." "I would not," Nathaniel replied. The following morning the Ashbourne Estate Council convened. Men in dark coats, voices measured, faces trained to conceal reaction. Nathaniel presented the documents without embellishment. He did not dramatize. He did not defend. He simply laid the truth before them. Sebastian stood at his side. When murmurs began, Sebastian raised his voice first. "I confirm the evidence," he said evenly. "My grievance was misdirected." The admission stunned the room. Investors exchanged glances. The senior council member cleared his throat. "If these documents are verified," he said carefully, "the current Duke's authority may be challenged." Nathaniel inclined his head. "I am aware. And you accept the consequences?" "Yes." Silence spread through the chamber. It was not outrage that filled the space. It was something quieter. Respect. Not for the scandal, but for the refusal to conceal it. When the meeting concluded, Nathaniel stepped outside into the courtyard. Eleanor followed. The air felt different, lighter, uncertain. "You may lose everything," she said softly. He turned toward her. "I have already gained more than I expected." She understood what he meant. "You no longer wish to be heir," she said. He considered that carefully. "I wish to inherit integrity," he replied. Footsteps approached behind them. Sebastian emerged into the courtyard. "The council will deliberate," he said. Nathaniel nodded once. "And if they strip you of succession?" Nathaniel looked at Eleanor, then back at his brother. "Then I will build something else." Sebastian studied him. "You would leave Ashbourne. If Ashbourne refuses truth, yes." The finality in his tone carried no bitterness, only certainty. Sebastian exhaled slowly. 15 years, he murmured. 15 years wasted on vengeance. "Not wasted," Eleanor said quietly, "just misdirected." Sebastian's gaze lingered on her. "You are inconvenient," he said. She smiled faintly. "I have been called worse." For the first time, the corner of Sebastian's mouth curved, not in mockery, in reluctant acknowledgement. The council's decision would not come until the next day. But something had already shifted. The heir of Ashbourne had chosen truth over title. And in doing so, he had broken the very chain that had bound him since childhood. Whether the estate would survive, the fracture remained uncertain. But one thing was no longer in question. Nathaniel Irwin was no longer the marble duke. He was a man willing to lose a crown rather than inherit a lie, and Eleanor, once unseen in market streets, now stood at the center of a transformation that would echo far beyond one house, one accident, or one storm. The final judgment was coming. Not from society, not from scandal, but from the truth itself. The verdict did not arrive with trumpets, it arrived with parchment. At noon the following day, the Ashbourne Estate Council delivered its decision. The documents were verified, the financial transfers confirmed. The former duke, long shielded by influence and fear, would be formally censured. His authority over the estate revoked, and the succession of Ashbourne would pass not by default, but by declaration. Nathaniel stood in the great hall as the announcement was read. Eleanor beside him, Sebastian opposite. The council's final words settled into silence. His Grace, Nathaniel Alexander Irwin, is recognized as Duke of Ashbourne in full authority, independent of his predecessor's governance. The title remained his, but not as inheritance, as choice. Nathaniel inclined his head once, not in triumph, in acceptance. When the chamber emptied, Sebastian approached slowly. "You have what you wanted," he said. Nathaniel met his gaze. "No," he replied quietly. "I have what is right." Sebastian nodded faintly. "My mother deserved truth. She has it now." "And Captain Frost?" Nathaniel looked toward Eleanor. "He will have his name restored." Sebastian held his brother's gaze a moment longer. "I was wrong," he said simply. Nathaniel did not offer dramatic forgiveness. He extended his hand. Sebastian hesitated, then clasped it, not as rivals, as men released from the same lie. That evening, Ashbourne House was quiet. No banquet, no spectacle, no orchestra, only candlelight, and the hush of a house no longer built on silence. Eleanor stood at the balcony overlooking the courtyard. The air carried the faint scent of early summer roses. Nathaniel joined her without announcement. "You may leave," he said gently. She turned toward him. Leave. You entered this house for survival, he continued, not ambition. If you wish to return to your former life, with your grandmother secure and your father restored, you are free. The words were steady, earnest. She studied his face carefully. You would release me? Yes. And what would you do? He exhaled softly. Continue as Duke. Alone, he did not say. She stepped closer. You once told me unity is proximity and calm, she said quietly. Yes. And what is this? He looked at her for a long moment. This is choice. She searched his expression. You are no longer bound to marry for obligation. No, you are no longer required to secure inheritance by strategy. No, she drew in a slow breath. Then hear me clearly, Nathaniel Irwin. He did not interrupt. I did not fall in love with a title. His gaze sharpened. I fell in love with the man who leapt from a moving carriage without hesitation. His breath stilled. With the man who chose truth over pride. With the man who learned to hold my hand, not because society demanded it, but because he feared losing it. Silence wrapped around them. The weight of everything unsaid pressed gently between them. You deserve affection, she said softly. And you deserve freedom, he replied. She smiled faintly. I choose you. The words were not dramatic. They were deliberate. Nathaniel stepped forward. This time there was no measured distance, no guarded pause. He cupped her face fully in his hands, no gloves, no restraint. I have never desired touch, he confessed quietly, until you. Her heart trembled at the honesty in his voice. You taught me, he continued, that distance is not strength. It is fear. And are you afraid now? She whispered. Yes. Of what? That I might not be enough for you. Her eyes softened. You are more than enough. He leaned in, not as a challenge, not as a declaration to a ballroom, but as a man asking, not taking. She met him halfway. The kiss was slow, intent, not born of scandal but of understanding. His hands held her with certainty, not possession, not obligation, certainty. When they parted, the world felt quieter, not because it had changed, but because they had. Weeks later, Ashbourne House opened its doors again, not for spectacle, for celebration. The wedding was held in the private chapel on the estate grounds. No grand exhibition. Only those who mattered. Mrs. Agnes Frost sat in the front pew, eyes bright with quiet pride. Captain James Frost, though still fragile in spirit, stood beside her. His name publicly cleared, his posture lighter than it had been in years. Sebastian attended, not as adversary, as witness. When Eleanor walked down the aisle, she did not feel displaced. She felt chosen. Nathaniel waited for her, not as marble duke, as a man unarmored. Their vows were simple, not elaborate, not theatrical. When the officiant asked if he took her freely, Nathaniel answered without hesitation, I do. And when Eleanor was asked the same, she smiled. I always did. Afterward, beneath a soft summer sky, they stood together before their guests. No whispers, no ridicule, only acceptance. Nathaniel drew her close, not cautiously, not self-consciously, easily, as if it had always belonged there. That night, long after the estate had quieted, they walked the garden paths alone. You once told me you required obedience, she said lightly. I was mistaken, he replied. And discretion? I still prefer it. She laughed softly. And what do you require now? He stopped walking, looked at her fully. Honesty, he said, and affection. He did not hesitate. Yes. She reached for his hand. He did not flinch. He did not hesitate. He held it firmly. Above them, the sky stretched wide and clear. The house behind them no longer carried the weight of buried storms. It carried choice, and in the quiet of that garden, Eleanor realized something she had never allowed herself to believe. Love had not rescued her. It had met her, on equal ground. Some houses are built on inheritance. Others are built on truth. Titles can be given, fortunes can be taken, but the courage to choose honesty over comfort, that must be earned. He began as a man who feared touch. She began as a woman who feared invisibility. Together, they learned that love is not possession. It is proximity chosen freely, and sometimes the bravest act is not falling in love. It is allowing yourself to stay. If you felt moved by Eleanor and Nathaniel's journey, leave a comment sharing which moment touched you most. Was it the kiss that began everything, the leap from the carriage, or the choice to stand for truth? Subscribe for more historical romances filled with quiet strength, emotional depth, and love that transforms without losing itself. Your presence here matters more than you know.